it's becoming more and more like one of the most horrifying mass shootings in history, and not simply because of the amount of people who were killed, but everything surrounding it. The parents had to wait for hours while being swabbed for DNA to find out whether or not their DNA matched with the kids who had been killed, standing outside screaming. Parents had to fight police officers trying to get inside. And I understand completely why, reasonably, it makes sense under a protocol to not want to make or let anyone enter an active shooter situation. That being said, if that is one of the things you're doing, we have to stop anyone from entering there. You also have to stop what's happening in there. It's like, I would be beside myself if I was a parent and I was trying to get into a school, or I was pleading. Like, I understand why parents were running around breaking police perimeter to try and sneak kids out of windows and help them and all that kind of stuff, you know? So here's what I was talking about that astounded me when I found out, and obviously is horrifying beyond belief, but there are so many mass shootings, especially ones related to schools in the United States right now, that I didn't even know that 3 high school graduations last Friday ended with gunfire in a single day. And because there are so many of these taking place, that the news cannot focus on any one of them for any prolonged period of time. That includes all mass shootings in the United States right now. We are not talking about the Buffalo shooting anymore. We've kind of moved on from the discussion of the role that white supremacy plays in all this, the role that indoctrination plays in all this, the role that a very horrifying turn of radicalization of young individuals through false messaging that is done under the patriarchy also plays in all this. Instead, we are just moving around like a headless chicken, basically trying to find where exactly are we supposed to position a flag in order to analyze any of this. It's absolutely confounding. 3 high school graduation ceremonies ended with shots fired in separate incidents in Louisiana, Michigan, and Tennessee within the span of 24 hours, another sobering example of gun violence impacting everyday lives, including that of teenage students. After students crossed the stages to receive their diplomas, chaos ensued with gunfire. At least 1 person was killed, 7 others were injured in a collective shooting that resulted in the arrest of a 17-year-old gunman in Tennessee. Shots were fired on Thursday as graduates of Hammond High School were leaving for their ceremony. In Michigan, a shooting erupted at East Kentwood High School campus outside of a football stadium. In Tennessee, a 17-year-old was arrested in a deadly shooting after a graduation ceremony at Riverdale High School. The graduation was just ending. People were leaving. This fight began. So imagine the chaos when the shots rang out. All within the span of 24 hours. Instead of canceling, Greg Abbott will deliver a video speech to the NRA. Texas Governor Greg Abbott garnered headlines late Thursday indicating that he plans to skip the National Rifle Association's annual meeting in Houston on Friday and instead travel to Uvalde, where the gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers at an elementary school. But look beyond the headlines reveals that Abbott is not actually skipping the event. In an apparent attempt to have it both ways, the governor recorded a video remark that will be played at the gun lobby's convention as he holds a press conference with local officials grieving with the residents of Uvalde. We're in the stage when Republican politicians hide and hope this blows over. Don't let it. Musician Curtis Stigers was among the voicing outrage at Abbott, a fervent opponent of basic gun safety regulations. This is bullshit. He's appearing. He's just doing it on a pre-recorded video. He still has the blood of these little children on his hands. Other prominent Republicans, including former President Donald Trump and Senator Ted Cruz, are expected to address the NRA gathering in person as gun control advocates prepare to hold protests outside. I'm going to be there because what Democrats and the press try to do in the wake of every mass shooting is try to demonize law-abiding gun owners and try to demonize the NRA, said Cruz, who has received nearly $750,000, $750,000 in donations from gun lobbying groups, including the NRA, over the course of his political career. Which, yeah, not a massive surprise there. Here's one thing we should look at. How are they addressing this issue on the Fox?
For an armed security guard,
armed safety officer,
armed deputy,
arming teachers,
potentially arm and prepare and train teachers and other administrators,
armed school staffers,
bring in policemen,
training
the students themselves.
Retired military, retired law enforcement. We can offer them tax breaks.
If you give law enforcement the opportunity to impose martial law, we can guarantee safety and security.
Securing that perimeter, providing kind of a ring of steel.
You have the fences, you have the main administration building, and then you have wide gaps on either side. The fencing's not very high.
Throw more guns at it. Have you tried guns? Have we tried guns? Have we tried armor and more guns? What about giant fences? Bulletproof windows so no one could ever smash them and get out in the other direction. How about all of that?
Were the doors locked?
Bulletproof glass.
All of these shootings have happened at the same time that we see religion and Christian values and Judeo-Christian values declining.
Anybody who decides that they want to do something like this should immediately know that attacking a school is a death sentence for them.
Kids are afraid of being the school snitch.
We have to stop letting these schools be gun-free zones.
People need to put their phones down and get to know the person next to them.
We have spent billions of dollars on COVID-related measures for our schools. Let's take some of that money and divert it over to hardening these soft targets.
A lot of these private schools, they take security way more serious.
Parents, take your children to church.
This
Like, if I'm hearing this right, you want to basically turn schools into war zones. Like, yes, there is a war right now, and we want the schools to be properly armed, adequately armed, in fact, more armed. So, I mean, why not tanks, grenade launchers? Why not a couple of grenades? Just have a row of them underneath every teacher's desk in case anything goes down. I mean, what are we saying here?
Police narrative is forcing people not to call police.
A series of interlocking doors at the school entrance that are triggered by a tripwire, and it traps the shooter like a rat.
Like, I'm sure everyone saw Sacha Baron Cohen, This Is America series, and he got an actual politician to do an entire PSA where he tries to train children and babies how to use guns. And back in the day, it was absolutely hilarious because I was like, this is genuinely ridiculous, absurd even. This person's career must be over. And that's just really a tale of things to come, it seems. Like, that's what conservatives want. The worse things get, the more intense things get. It's like, well, why aren't we arming kids? Why aren't we training kids? Why don't kids have guns? And, I mean, I don't know if I'm being highly controversial here to say I think the problem was a kid with a gun. That kind of seems like that was the issue in the first place.
Is the answer to that.
There's a moral rot going on that we all need to dig in and try to address.
I vote for decreasing social media exposure.
We need to start focusing on mental health.
Tell us why you think it's important to pray in a moment like this.
It calls for faith and prayer.
Why is it that schools aren't protected in the same way that airports?
There are some people who don't want police officers in schools with guns because other people are triggered.
Assault rifle and enhanced body armor.
A notification system to let everybody in the school know what's happening.
Single point of entry.
I don't like talking about this stuff as it happens because I don't think it contributes anything positive.
Parents should be held accountable for raising their children properly.
Ballistic blankets.
We just don't have the resources to get
Ballistic blankets. I went to public school in Canada, and I not once did I think about any of this stuff. Like, really until Columbine, the concept of this happening, and let alone happening on a regular basis, was so foreign. The idea that a school would be anything other than, the place where, like, the worst thing about going to school, hey, we got a Chica. Things will be a little bit more easy to handle now. The worst thing about going to school in terms of danger would be bullies or kids who are going to be mean to you. That was my biggest fear. I never worried about what if I went into school today, could this be the day when one of the students is going to come in and try to shoot everybody? But you know what? Good thing I have ballistic blankets, because that means that should that happen, we know what to do. We go reach out for our ballistic blankets and wrap ourselves in them, and then just hope the police do their job and don't wait an hour to do anything about an active shooter being inside of a school. So that'll be a thing.
law enforcement there quickly.
How about an executive order for these mental health facilities?
We have to start rebuilding this country and returning to God.
I arm myself everywhere I legally can.
It's up to you to protect yourself.
I mean, it kind of seems like they just want to ramp things up. In the wake of all this, it's like we need to accelerate. They're accelerationists, really, when it comes to gun control. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick says after prayerful consideration, he will no longer speak at the NRA convention today. After prayerful consideration. Well, I'm glad God gave you the sign. That's good. Developing. The tactical team that eventually killed the Uvalde gunman arrived at the school far earlier than previously known, but was told to hold back and not go in by local police, according to 2 officials familiar with the response. Officials describe a harrowing scene. Let's see if we can try and get a timeline here. The authorities outlined a series of missteps that the police made as the gunman fired more than 100 rounds. In a tense and at times emotional news conference outside of Robb Elementary School, top Texas state official acknowledged that the decision by local police officers on the scene of the mass shooting to not breach the classroom for more than an hour as the rampage was taking place was the wrong decision. Wow. Glad you're on the record now. Obviously, based on the information we have, there were children in that classroom that were still at risk. From the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course, it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period. Questions are coalescing around what exactly happened between the first 911 calls when the officers made it into the school. Officials said they were working to understand whether the 8 or 9 children who were reported alive at 12:15, about 45 minutes before officers killed the gunman, were amongst those who died. He said at least 2 of the children called 911, and those 2 students survived. At least 2 students called 911 during the shooting. The gunman at one point opened the door to the classroom and went back out the hallway. McGraw said he said the gunman had locked the door from inside, but did not say whether he had made any efforts to barricade the door after that. In response to questions why there was any significant delay in authorities responding to the gunman, the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety on the scene commander believed it was considered a barricaded subject situation. Officials are describing the harrowing series of 911 calls, including made by children inside the school at 12:16, about 45 minutes before the gunman was killed. A girl who was inside one of the classrooms where the gunman opened fire called 911 several times during the siege. McGraw said, "Please send the police now." The authorities now say local officers first entered the school at 11:35, 2 minutes after the gunman, and that there were 19 officers in the hallway at 12:03, but they did not breach the door and kill the gunman until 12:50, even as they continued to hear him firing. This is wild. So the local officers were in there at 11:35, and he continued until 12:50. Police gathered outside to prevent parents from going inside. Steve McGraw, director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, has offered a timeline of events during the shooting. He said that the door that the suspect is believed to have entered was left propped open by a teacher. So now we're blaming the teachers. When the specially equipped federal immigration agents arrived at the elementary school, the local police on the scene would not allow them to go after the gunman who had opened fire on the students inside the school. The agents from the Border Patrol and Immigration Customs Enforcement arrived at some point between 12 and 12:10, according to the officials, far earlier than previously known, but they did not breach the adjoining classrooms of the school where the gunman had locked himself in until 1 p.m. The officials said that members of the Uvalde Police Department kept the federal agents from going in sooner. The new details deepen questions about the tactics used in response to the shooting and the length it took officers on the scene to end the carnage. The director of the Texas Department of Public Safety was expected to hold a news conference about the shooting. The federal agents reported they arrived to a scene of chaos. People pulling children out of windows while local police carrying only handguns and a few rifles were trying to secure a perimeter, according to one official who, like the others, spoke on the conditions of anonymity to discuss the ongoing investigation. The Border Patrol and ICE agents did not understand why they were left to wait, according to the official. Eventually, the specialized Border Patrol team went into the building. Texas law enforcement officials have said the gunman was locked in a pair of adjoining classrooms and had already shot a number of students there in the first few minutes with him pinned down. They said local police initially focused on evacuating students from teachers and elsewhere from the school. Law enforcement officers initially tried to enter the classroom but fell back after the gunman fired on them, injuring 2 officers, state law enforcement said. Most, if not all, of the 21 victims of the attack, including 19 students and 2 teachers, died in the area where the gunman, identified as, had locked himself in. The gunman was fatally shot by the federal team and entered the rooms more than an hour after the initial 911 call. The federal officers had driven up from the Mexican border, one official said. The official said it was not clear to the federal agents why their team was needed and why the local SWAT team did not respond. Teachers, union leaders, school shooting survivors, and activists are now meeting in Houston, where the NRA is hosting their annual convention. It's happening at the same time. So why were they told to hold back? Why did it take them so long? Why did they enter the school at 11:35, hearing gunshots? So many questions. I mean, the obvious and easy answer is that they didn't want to directly go into the line of fire. which is a natural response for any human being. I myself would not run into a building where gunshots were taking place. I can't say the same if, you know, children were in there or my kids were in there. You know, I probably would be amongst the parents fighting cops to try and get inside. Who knows? I can't say. I can't talk to that. I've never been in that situation, and I pray I never will. That being said, I am not armed, trained, and paid by the city to do just that. Because that is what we're told. The police are there to protect and serve. They're there to uphold the safety of the citizens of their area. You don't have to be a far lefty to recognize now that this seems to be a situation in which the very people who are paid large amounts of city budgets have failed horrifyingly in this case at doing their duty. At a time, too, when I'm going to talk a little bit about the statistics when it comes to police, the statistics when it comes to what police are actually doing in terms of killing and what effects that's having, broadly speaking, on society. But this one is just, it's becoming more and more like one of the most horrifying mass shootings in history, and not simply because of the amount of people who were killed, but everything surrounding it. The parents had to wait for hours while being swabbed for DNA to find out whether or not their DNA matched with the kids who had been killed, standing outside screaming. Parents had to fight police officers trying to get inside. And I understand completely why, reasonably, it makes sense under a protocol to not want to make or let anyone enter an active shooter situation. That being said, if that is one of the things you're doing, we have to stop anyone from entering there. You also have to stop what's happening in there. It's like, I would be beside myself if I was a parent and I was trying to get into a school or I was pleading. Like, I understand why parents were running around breaking police perimeter to try and sneak kids out of windows and help them and all that kind of stuff, you know? Students who were in the classroom when the gunman called 911 several times, including a lengthy call during which some of the shooting and other sounds of the attack could be heard. According to Steve McGraw, director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, a caller identified, I will not say her name, but she was in a room at 1:12, called 911 at 12:03. The duration of the call was 1 minute and 23 seconds. She identified herself and whispered she's in room 112. This is at 12 o'clock, by the way. The shooter's not taken down until 12:50. At 12:10, she called back, so 2 times in room 112, advised there are multiple dead. At 12:13, again, she called on the phone. Again, at 12:16, she called back and said there was 8 to 9 students still alive. At 12:19, a 911 call was made. Another person in the room, 111, called. I will not say her name. She hung up when another student told her to hang up. At 12:21, you could hear her over the 911 call that 3 shots were being fired. 12:36, another 911 call that lasted 21 seconds. The initial caller called back. The student child called back and was told to stay on the line and be very quiet. She told 911 that he heard a shot at the door. At approximately 12:43 and 12:47, she asked 911 to please send the police now. 12:46, she said she could not, that she could hear the police at the next door. At 12:50, shots were fired. They could be heard over the 911 call. 12:51, it's very loud and sounds like the officers are moving the children out of the room. At that time, the first child that called was outside and the call cuts off. Uvalde survivor claims one girl was shot by the gunman after police told her to yell for help. A Uvalde school shooting survivor has recalled hearing his classmate get shot by an 18-year-old gunman after she yelled to police for help. Speaking with Ken 5 on Thursday, the Robb Elementary School student said he was inside the double classroom when the shooter entered the building. 2 rooms, both filled with students, were connected by a middle door, and the shooter was able to open in the hour he spent inside the school. We have a door in the middle, he said. He opened it, he came in, and he crouched a little bit, and he said, it's time to die. When I heard the shooting through the door, I told my friend to hide under something so he won't find us. I was hiding hard, and I was telling my friend to not talk because he was going to hear us. While he and his friends hid underneath a tablecloth-covered table, the boy recalled hearing police enter the room and asked if anybody needed help. When the cops came, the cops said, yell if you need help, and one of the persons in my class said, help, and the boy overheard, and he came in and shot her. The boy said he eventually came out from hiding when he spotted law enforcement with shields and knew that it was the police, but only when the shooting stopped. I just opened the curtain and I just put my hand out, he said. I got out with my friend. I knew it was the police. I saw the armor and I saw the shield. It was unclear at that point during the attack. The girl was allegedly shot, and when the boy was able to leave the classroom, law enforcement authorities said on Thursday that in contradiction to preliminary reports, the gunman was able to walk into the school on Tuesday unchallenged. 2 police officers engaged with the shooter within 4 minutes, but took cover when he fired back, authorities said, and the shooter remained inside the classroom for an hour. He was killed by the tactical unit from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, who stormed the school and ended the attack. The boy paid tribute to the teachers, Irma Garcia and Eva Morales, for saving their lives and said they were nice teachers. They went in front of my classmates to help to save them. So, all these horrors and atrocities that are taking place. This was brought up quite a bit during the Black Lives Matter movement last year in, well, I mean, across the world. Police killings are the 6th leading cause of death amongst young men, a new study shows. Young Americans are at a high risk of being killed by the police. According to a recent study, police killings, which can include shootings, chokings, and other uses of force, are the 6th leading cause of death amongst men of all races, ages 25 to 29. According to a study published by the National Academy of Science, accidental death, a category that includes drug overdoses and car accidents, was the biggest cause. If you control for Black Americans, it is the leading cause of death of young Black Americans getting killed by the police. Death by firearms related injuries is now the leading cause of children in the United States as well.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Goodman. This week marks 2 years since George Floyd was murdered by former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. His death spurred a global movement for racial justice and intensified the push for police accountability and abolition. On Wednesday, the city of Minneapolis renamed the intersection where he was killed as George Perry Floyd Square. On the same day, members of Floyd's family attended a White House ceremony where President Biden signed an executive order directing federal agencies to revise use of force policies, banning tactics like chokeholds and restricting practices like no-knock warrants, while establishing a national database of police misconduct. Biden's executive order came as a reform bill. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act remains stalled in the Senate amidst Republican opposition. On Wednesday, Juan Gonzalez and I spoke with Robin Wansley-Warlaba. She's a longtime activist in Minneapolis. Earlier this year, she became Minneapolis's first Black Democratic Socialist City Council member. She was part of a coalition successfully blocking the relocation of the 3rd Precinct Police Station, where Chauvin was based, which still sits vacant today. I began by asking Robin Wansley where she was when she...
I never said this in the middle of everything else, but I do want to bring this up. I'm so sorry. A neighboring county, Stafford, had teachers who left the trans child alone in the hallway during an active shooter drill because the teachers refused to bring the child into one of the gendered locker rooms, so they locked the child in the hallway. It crushes my soul every time I recall that story, or the numerous kids with disabilities and disabled kids honoring all the ways they choose to identify who will get left in the hall or left to be the first targets. We must act, vote, and keep important conversations happening to create more protection and policy. Considering the windows or lack of windows, considering racial profiling, considering the trauma or unresolved trauma in teachers, students, and staff not feeling safe in their learning spaces, considering the lack of mental health support post-incidents, and the lingering and unresolved grief and anxiety that PTSD and related conditions leaves folks, especially young children.
Heard about George Floyd's murder Memorial Day weekend in 2020.
I was like many many residents at the time. I was, I believe, running errands when I first heard word of it. And then I had, community members share the historic footage of Floyd being pinned, against the ground with Derek Chauvin, Officer Derek Chauvin's knee, forcefully placed upon Floyd's neck. That image in itself forced me to pull over, and I just remember being in a deep paralysis and shaking and crying. And as you noted in my intro, I've been an organizer in Minneapolis, and unfortunately, a lot of my organizing work has revolved around police related murders of Black people, from Jamar Clark to Philando Castile. And, I was there with Philando Castile watching as, St. Anthony and their officers washed the blood off the sidewalk or the street. And now here I am watching George Floyd be killed like millions of others around the world. And of course, just was forced into a pause of, all the things that have transpired that led to that moment, the failure of our leadership to really address the deep inequities that have been documented here in Minneapolis specifically for a number of years, especially around policing, and how if we had better leadership, willing to exercise even the bare minimum of political will and political courage, especially with our police federation, with our officers, how we would not have had to endure the collective trauma of watching George Floyd be lynched. And then basically afterwards seeing our city burn nearly down because of this collective oppression. You know, Martin Luther King says, you know, the riots are the sounds of the oppressed. You know, I just think there was so much that could have happened that activists and residents have been organizing.
Protesters rallied for gun reform on Friday near the convention center in Houston, where the National Rifle Association's annual convention was being held just 3 days after a mass shooting at an elementary school less than 300 miles away.
Gun violence affects each and every one of us, from the children at Uvalde to the people in Buffalo, New York, to the black trans women that are murdered every single year. You're going to hear a lot of points of view today, but the main thing is we need to remember who we need to organize against, and that is those people in there.
Amongst other things, by the way, this is a very multifaceted problem. Tim Pool says, defund the police, and this is what you get: incompetent officers. This year, the Uvalde Police general funding is up almost $250,000. Uvalde Police received a $532,000 grant from Governor Abbott. The Uvalde School District received $435,000 to strengthen security. And Tim Pool Clips provides all the sources for all of that. Not a surprise there, though. So, I remember when defund the police was a pretty loud call coming from the left, and eventually it turned from defund the police to reform the police to nothing, and then to fund the police more is eventually what this all turned into. A lot of people were talking about the fact that the messaging wasn't great, that leftists sometimes get too obsessed with slogans, and sometimes they just want to hear people say the thing. You know, say the thing, Bart. Capitalism bad. Yay! Kind of thing. Which, you know what, fair enough. There are definitely times when leftists want to make sure that what they're getting information from is someone who is on board with all of the same ideas, rather than this is someone who might be pushing for something right now that is has a chance of passing or going through. I can look to an example right now for a person running in LA at the local level for the board who's trying to enact a policy of reappropriating funds from the police force directly to other programs, social programs, that kind of stuff, and is being pushed back against by both the right and the left, because the left don't think that they are a defund the police candidate, and in the other direction, obviously, the right don't want someone who's going to do that. I've been saying more and more lately that messaging is becoming increasingly important, because, again, a lot of the things that the left advocate for are enormously popular. Things like a public health care option is enormously popular. Things like background checks, even universal background checks, enormously popular amongst Americans. And sometimes things can get lost in the messaging and the way things are proposed. If the messaging is simply that we need to abolish capitalism and then nothing else will do, along the way you're not going to find a lot of allies who probably think that you are a postmodern neo-Marxist communist. Data shows that 9 out of 10 calls for service are for non-violent encounters. Now, does this mean that the incident will not turn violent, but the police at times contribute to the escalation of violent force? Police officers' skill set and training are often out of sync with the social interactions that they have. Police officers are mostly trained for use of force tactics and worst-case scenarios to reduce potential threats. However, most of their interactions with civilians start with the conversation. Advocates for the defund movement say that shifting funding to social services can improve things such as mental health, addiction, and homelessness, and is a better use of taxpayer money. This approach further enhances the push to decriminalize and destigmatize people with mental health conditions and addiction problems. Ever since the over-criminalization of people addicted to crack cocaine in the 1990s, some scholars, practitioners, and policymakers have said that shift is long overdue. Additionally, the research I've conducted with hundreds of police officers show that they respond to everything from potholes in the street to cats up in a tree. Police officers are also increasingly asked to complete paperwork and online forms. Obviously, documentation is important and desperately needed. The overwhelmingly blank report in the killing of Breonna Taylor in Louisville that listed her injuries as none highlights the importance of documentation. It could be argued, however, that reducing officer workload would increase the likelihood of solving violent crimes. Police officers are overworked and understressed. But what do you get for spending half of your city's budget on a police force? Police officers are not as successful as people think at solving violent crime. My Brookings colleagues Andrew Perry, David Hashbarger, and Carl Romer and Christian Thymianos argue the failure to prosecute murderous police typifies a bad overall track record with solving violent crimes. Approximately 38% of murders, 66% of rapes, 70% of robberies, and 47% of aggravated assaults go unclear every year. Maybe in baseball or basketball these rates make a player an all-star, but in the public expects police officers to be more successful at solving violent crime. More importantly, police stops relative to charges and convictions are relatively low. To show how egregious this is, a study of the NYPD stop and frisk program found that 90% of the people stopped by the police were not committing any crime and did not have any contraband or weapons on them. Overwhelmingly, the people they stopped were Black and Latino, and physical force was used half of the time. Interestingly, police were more successful at identifying criminality from whites versus blacks. This is because officers use suspicious behavior when interacting with whites and use skin tone as the metric of suspicion when interacting with black people. More police on the street may be used to control the movement of black bodies rather than solving crime. This is why New York State Supreme Court ruled stop and frisk as unconstitutional. No-knock warrants and chokeholds should follow this pattern. One consistent finding in social science literature is that if we really want to reduce crime, education equity, and the establishment of a work infrastructure is the best approach. A study using 60 years of data found that an increase in funding for police did not significantly relate to a decrease in crime. Throwing more police on the street to solve a structural problem is one of the reasons why people are protesting in the streets. Defunding police, reallocating funding away from the police departments to other sectors of government may be more beneficial for reducing crime and police violence. So if the fifth largest cause of death for young men in America, the sixth largest cause of death for young men in America currently is being killed by the police. The number one cause of death for young black Americans is being killed by the police. A lot of that has to do with the fact that police are being sent in to handle a handful of things and interactions that their training puts them in a bad situation to deal with what they are confronting. This is a problem that also happens in Canada. The RCMP respond to what are called wellness checks, often on individuals who are Indigenous in this country, that often end with violence because, surprise, surprise, if you are an officer whose training is to protect yourself and prepare for a potential conflict, it may be difficult for you to deal with someone who has mental illness and understand the person is exhibiting signs of a potential mental illness rather than directly looking to confront you with violence. Police budgets are ballooning as social programs crumble. Cities across the country have defied demands from protesters to defund the police, despite facing huge budgets. This is from a year ago. Nothing has changed. Faced with mass teacher layoffs, deep cuts to education and social services, looming eviction crises, police budgets across the nation remain absurdly high and have been largely insulated from COVID-induced belt tightening, whereas yet a number of cities have opted to increase police budgets, claiming the funds are needed to pay for the reforms. This is despite the fact that the racial justice protesters across the country are clearly calling for the defunding of the police, a demand that stems from abolition principles. Budget cuts are seen as part of the process of dismantling prisons and policing while investing in community alternatives and social goods in order to reimagine public safety. In Phoenix, where activists demanded a 25% cut in the police budget, the city voted on a $24 million increase. And they anticipate a $26 million budget deficit over the same period. The Phoenix Police Department's $592 million annual budget will account for 40% of the city's discretionary funds, with $3 million going to a new police oversight agency. Rejecting residents' calls to cut police spending, San Diego increased its annual police budget by $27 million to $566 million. The department will account for about a third of the city's general fund. The NYPD clocking in at $11 billion. That is half the budget of the Canadian military being spent on the police force. If you see that footage of police officers marching in the streets of New York, you will understand why. They are an army unto themselves. There was a whole bunch of investigation into different Canadian cities that I wanted to look at, seeing what exactly, how much they spend versus how much is the police budget. This is a cross-section of major cities in Canada. Surprisingly, Winnipeg has an incredibly high police budget relative to the rest of their budget. Vancouver, it's almost a quarter. I was very shocked to find out Toronto has a very small police budget in relation to its other budget. Toronto actually spends a lot of money on other social programs rather than spending an exorbitant amount of their budget on that. But these all pale in comparison to the United States, where a lot of these will be nearly half of each of the city's budget. Now, I said that there is, if you feel helpless about all of this, a way to approach it, a novel way, and a way that will actually impact change. I know this sounds like a handful of buzzwords, because I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again, and I'm really, really happy that Adam Conover's show, this was the final episode kind of thesis. The idea of local elections. Small local elections. I know, it sounds silly, it sounds pointless. Guess what? Guess who controls your police budgets? Guess who controls the ability for the police to prioritize what they do in your area? Whether or not they should be arresting non-violent drug offenders, whether or not they should be having half of the budget of your cities. That's your local elections that determines that. That's your local elections that put people on board that can choose whether or not they will determine that. And guess what? In local elections, voter turnout is less than 15%. That's right, 1-5. If you are old, if you are a senior, you are 7 times more likely to vote in a local election. Nobody cares about local elections. 15% is outrageous. In fact, it's so low that as a strategy in Philadelphia, a whole bunch of people who used to work for the Bernie Sanders campaign started running in local municipal elections using the same strategies, grassroots, and they got elected overwhelmingly. And now they are having, and they're in positions of power to change this. So this is something that, broadly speaking, yes, the left isn't that large compared relatively to the rest of the US population. But in cities right now where you might be terrified, where you might be thinking to yourself, hey, there's a war on trans people, there's a war on queer people, there's a war on black people, there's a war on indigenous people. There seems to be a consistent push, and none of the problems that need to be addressed are getting addressed. The solution, and one in which you could win very decidedly, is to organize and to win in municipal elections. Again, 15%. If only 15% are voting, you can even get by and shock everyone by all of a sudden being like, wait, there's a socialist who's controlling the budget? There's a socialist who's working on restricting the powers of the police? There's a socialist who's suddenly, or a communist, or an anarchist, or even a sock dem who's going to come in there and say, I would like the police of this area to stop prioritizing and targeting trans people. I would like the police of this area to start targeting non-violent drug offenders. I would like us to prioritize moving money out of the police budget into social programs, and I would like the police to respond to things that include violence. I would like to change or even discuss perhaps reforming the way police are trained, and I would also like to work on putting a whole bunch more money of the city's budget into social spending. That is something that you can achieve at a local level. And it's something that you can win at a local level. And it's also one of those things that not a lot of people talk about because it seems boring as fuck. You know, if you were to ask me who exactly is my city's comptroller, I couldn't tell you. If you were to tell me who was the head of the parks board, I couldn't tell you either. Because again, no one really cares. But you will be able to impact and have power in your community at the levels of government that actually impact this stuff. Now, that's just one thing, obviously, and that's the most the most impactful thing about being able to change this kind of stuff immediately. Secondly, I've seen a lot of tweets where it's like, no one's coming to help us, we have to help ourselves. There is some truth to the matter of saying that direct action, community building, and working together to provide mutual aid is more important now than ever. There are parts of both Canada and the United States right now where there is massive food insecurity because of the cost of gas, because of the cost of food, all that kind of stuff, where things like a fridge program is so very necessary. In Vancouver, for example, the DSA here throws the last Saturday of every month does a community fridge program. I'm going to be there this Saturday, and at those events, I'll give you a big thanks in a second, sweet nothing. At those events, you show up, you bring all the perishable goods, ideally healthier is better, all the perishable goods that you can afford to bring if you're in a position to do so. You can also make fresh cooked meals. You just have to provide the ingredients for doing so. Try to make them healthy as well, but delicious, because again, people who have food insecurity should also be having amazing meals. You show up, you bring it, you drop it off, and you start helping and building your community, because that is the kind of stuff that is genuinely going to help and impact people's lives today or tomorrow or any given day. It's one of those things that makes you feel so much less helpless, especially in the face of all this horrifying news that you see nonstop. The news only focuses on the worst things in society. You're not going to see MSNBC, ABC, CNN, all of them talk about, hey, fucking almost 100 Starbucks have unionized. Isn't that incredible? Amazon has unionized for the first time ever. Isn't that incredible? No, they'll do one story here and there. That's it. But that movement is still growing, and this movement can grow in other ways. If you feel helpless because the left seems fractured post Bernie Sanders or post Force the Vote or post whatever people want to fracture in it, this is another way to feel unified and genuinely help people. And again, in local municipal elections, there are things that you can do at that level, and if every single small town, district, whatever, suddenly had, a voice of the left that was in power, there are things that you can do to also start working on curbing climate change, on all the big issues, on helping people who might not have health care, on helping people who might not have access to the things necessary to prevent a pandemic, to help people who are the most vulnerable under a pandemic, first line responders, people who with disabilities, all that kind of stuff. These are things you can do with a lot of power, even as a single individual, at the state and municipal level, that you cannot do on the federal level. And all of us, because we are indoctrinated with the way that the media has set everything up, kind of believe that the be-all end-all is basically, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, the presidential election of the United States. That's it. It's basically that, hey, if the U.S. gets a Bernie Sanders, everything is good. We'll be saved now. We'll fix everything. Or even like sometimes a Senate races, or sometimes provincial races, like the one that's taking place in Ontario right now. That's not going to affect your day-to-day in the same way that completely dominating a municipal election will be. The municipal elections in Vancouver coming up in October, I'm going to be heavily involved. I'm going to try and use it as a teaching tool to try and impart to other people things that can be done. There is a political team that is trying to come into power in my city that is mostly made up of cops. I kid you not. It's a huge amount of Vancouver Police Department, either ex-officers, current officers, wives of officers. It is a shit mix of the worst degree. And you know exactly what they're going to do should they come into power. And so, yeah, I'm going to be fighting against that. And it's going to be harder in a city, and a major city like Vancouver, as it would be in Toronto. It's going to be way easier in smaller towns where you might live. You might live in a small town in Oklahoma. You might not notice, but the local elections could have voter turnouts of only a couple hundred people. If you had a handful of candidates, like, think of this for a second. Apparently, about 10% of the population is gay or bi. So 10% of the population in your local town will be pro-LGBTQ, to give or take, based on people leaving or going and maybe leaving the state out of fear. Between 1.5 to 2.7% of the population is trans, which means that you already have a supportive amount of people in that community who are most likely going to be pro-LGBTQ+, and also be aligned with a lot of other things that you were trying to fight for. If you collectively banded together and tried to get a single candidate in a small local election into power, it's going to be realistically a lot easier than trying to get someone like Bernie Sanders to become the president of the United States. And we all band together when that happens, because everyone is like, yes, this is such a hopeful moment in history, but these are things that you can do, and you can do in almost every single country. I was trying to look at the same statistics in other countries, and a lot of them work the same way. Local municipal governments have incredibly low turnouts no matter where I looked at the stats, and the fact that they're so low and they're so unspoken about, they get dominated by the same groups every single cycle. There's no one shaking them up. Right now, there's a really strong push online in the alt-right and the hateful centers of the internet to try and get tons and tons of people elected, QAnoners, etc. That's why you're seeing suddenly all these QAnoners popping up in elections in the States. But not a lot of people are still focused on smaller local elections, and that is where the left has an incredible chance to to win. It doesn't matter where it is. And that is where you can directly impact the things that will affect your life every day. We're talking rent hikes. We're talking police budgets. We're talking about the priorities of the police, the enforcement of the state power or the municipal power. You will have control over that. So this is not something that people can, I think, afford anymore to ignore. And the left should certainly stop treating it as, well, yeah, but that's just kind of like, it's small potatoes. Come on, we got to think about when the next president of the United States will be a full-blooded communist. No, that, like, realistically, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So in the interim, you could actually do something immediately. Check out when your local elections are. Get organized. Band together with unions. Band together with worker co-ops. Band together with pro-LGBTQ plus organizations. Get together, get organized, and get people elected into the lowest levels of government, the smallest levels of government, and start enacting change and grow from there. The more this happens, the more it'll catch like fire. The stories of Philadelphia, they are inspiring. If they can be emulated and brought out to other cities, more people will see this as a chance to have actual impact on the left, and they will continue to grow. You will see this time and time again. A socialist candidate like Shamus Awant has done incredible things at a higher level, granted, than the local level, but that is just showing you an example of what someone can do in those positions. It has to be now, I think, one of the most important pushes of the left if you want to talk about organization. So again, direct action, very important. Protesting, very important. Mutual aid, extremely important, especially right now when people are starving, all that kind of stuff. But working on small local elections and getting lefties in there to be able to reduce the power either of the police or the priorities of the police to stop having them go after drug offenders, etc., nonviolent drug offenders, is an incredible strategy that could work and does work. It's been shown time and time again to work. And that's my 2 cents. And now for some doom.
In Uvalde, which left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. On Thursday, Victor Escalon of the Texas Department of Public Safety said there were no officers outside the school to confront the 18-year-old gunman, contradicting earlier accounts that a school resource officer unsuccessfully engaged the teen. Few answers about the initial police response and why officers took over an hour to directly confront the shooter, even though scores of police officers were on the scene.
Once we interview all those officers, what they were thinking, what they did, why they did it, the video, the residual interviews, we'll have a better idea.
But it is a function of class. The well-educated elite think one way, and the regular guy in America thinks another way. I identify with the regular guy. The elite are morons. They're mean morons. If you look at what goes on at colleges, look at what goes on at Disney, American Express, and all these other extremely wealthy, extremely well-educated. This is a class war, ironically. I'm talking in Marxist terms now.
Oh.
It's a class war.
Do tell.
The upper elite versus the riffraff, the people for whom they have contempt. The truck drivers in Canada. It's a classic example
Tell me more.
Of the class war that we're having in this country.
Mm-hmm.
It's ironic. If you take Marx seriously, you'll vote Republican.
And you keep saying, but my kids need food! And now inflation is here, and there's food shortages, and your kids aren't eating, and the schools are indoctrinating your kids.
I mean, Dennis Prager is the definition of an elite, telling you to worry about the elites. It couldn't be more striking.
Could anybody have gone there sooner?
One mother was handcuffed by a U.S. Marshal as she pleaded with officers to do more to help the students trapped inside the school. Another officer was seen holding a taser to keep angry parents at bay. One law enforcement official told a local news channel some officers went into the school to rescue their own children.
Hey, what up, Lost? Everyone go subscribe to Lost channel.
Meanwhile, the husband of a 4th-grade teacher killed in Tuesday's massacre died Thursday of a heart attack. 50-year-old Joe Garcia had just returned home from dropping off flowers at a memorial for his wife, Irma Garcia, when he collapsed. Garcia's cousin wrote, "I truly believe Joe died of a broken heart." Joe and Irma Garcia were high school sweethearts who'd been married for a quarter of a century. They leave behind 4 children.
She was the hero, by the way. All the Republicans who kept on tweeting out like, oh, you know, all of the glory to our incredible police officers, for without them we would be nothing, they saved the day, all this kind of stuff. It's like the teachers who sacrificed themselves to stand in harm's way are the heroes.
In Toronto, Canada, 5 schools were placed on lockdown Thursday as police shot and killed a man seen carrying a rifle near an elementary school.
Oh, did you all know about this one? Yeah, this happened in Canada. Whole bunch of schools went into lockdown because the person was walking around with a rifle.
Toronto Police Chief James Raymer wouldn't name the person killed, but described him as a young man in his late teens or early 20s.
Due to the proximity to a school, I certainly understand the trauma and how traumatic this must have been for staff, students, and parents, given the recent events that have happened in the United States.
Students at scores of schools across the United States walked out of classrooms at the stroke of noon Thursday in a coordinated protest demanding passage of gun control laws. In Michigan, hundreds of Oxford high school students assembled on their school's football field, forming a giant U in solidarity with victims of the massacre in Uvalde. 4 Oxford students were killed in November by a 15-year-old gunman. Data from the Centers for Disease Control shows firearms have surpassed motor vehicle crashes as the leading cause of death for children in the United States.
CTV's confirmed that the rifle in the Toronto shooting wasn't a rifle. It turned out to be a BB gun. Really? Wow.
United States. On Capitol Hill, Senate Republicans used the threat of a filibuster Thursday to block a bill to combat neo-Nazi and white supremacist violence. 47 Republicans voted against ending debate on the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, which would create domestic terrorism offices within the FBI and the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security. This comes less than 2 weeks after a white supremacist gunman killed 10 African Americans.
Now, I can already hear the Glenn Greenwald response to this. It's like, I don't want to increase the overreaching power of the government, and I was like, the overreaching power of the government exists. I think this would be a department that would be specializing in seeking out the actual real threat of white supremacist terrorism in the U.S. But
at a grocery store in a predominantly black neighborhood of Buffalo, New York. On Thursday, the Senate adjourned for a 10-day recess after failing to take action on gun violence in the wake of the mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas.
Like, what do you even say is your justification for that? Like, well, I mean, hey, what if I myself decide one day to become a neo-Nazi terrorist? Like, do I want a department that's actually investigating me? Like,
Democrats rallied outside the Capitol demanding gun control while rejecting Republican calls to arm
Mr. Whiskers, thank you for the prime.
Arm teachers and school resource officers. This is California Senator Alex Padilla.
And no, putting more armed adults in schools is not the answer. If more guns was the answer, the United States of America would be the safest nation in the world. But it's not.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott has canceled plans to speak live at the annual convention of the National Rifle Association, which opens today in Houston, less than 300 miles from the site of Tuesday's massacre in Uvalde. But he will send a video to...
Oh, I don't know if that was Klobuchar, but Amy... I don't know if everyone saw the tweet that Amy posted. The fetishization of the glory of the police force is done by both Democrats and Republicans. It's a problem of both parties, by the way. It's not something that we can only wag the finger at Republicans for. But she made a tweet that was like, 444 officers have lost their lives this year in the line of duty. We must, always defend and stand up for the boys in blue, all this kind of shit. And you're like, did you look into the stats of that, Amy? The vast majority, 70% of them died because they refused to get vaccinated and they died from COVID. Are you going to add that? Why are you adding the weird stolen valor glory that they were like shot heroically in the line of duty when many of them died because they refused to be vaccinated?
Other prominent Texas Republicans, Senator John Cornyn and Congressmember Dan Crenshaw, also canceled plans to attend the NRA gathering, as have 4 music stars, Larry Gatlin, Larry Stewart, and Don McLean. Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz and Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick still plan to attend, as does today's featured speaker, former President Donald Trump. The NRA says
Trump doesn't give a fuck. Klobuchar covered up the murder of an unarmed black man by a cop. She probably is going to be fighting his BP, if not for the Black Lives Matter protests. I can see that. Oh yeah, the squirrel blocked me. Do you know why the squirrel blocked me, by the way? Because me and the squirrel were always on friendly terms. But the squirrel blocked me because during the last, I mean, I don't want to say it ever stops because Israel's constantly committing atrocities in Gaza. But during the last basically big campaign where they were bombing like the Al Jazeera office and all this kind of stuff, the squirrel tweeted out a picture of a whole bunch of Israeli citizens who were sitting on a couch watching the Iron Dome shoot rockets out of the sky. And all I said is I just responded to that photo saying, just by the way, you know, in the interests of honesty, this photo is from like, I think 12 years ago. Not that this doesn't happen, but it makes it seem by posting this photo now and saying like, it is disgusting in the midst of everything that is happening that they're doing this. And I'm not denying they might not be doing this at this moment, but just so everyone knows, this is like a 12-year-old photo. And she blocked me.
Secret Service will prohibit guns inside the Houston Convention Center during Trump's speech.
She defended Glenn Greenwald? Ugh, that is weird. I'm sorry, I didn't know the squirrel was yikes. I don't, for the most part, the squirrel, like, I used to like the squirrel because the squirrel kept unbelievable receipts on people. Like, she would go through someone, like, if you brought up someone's name, she would be able to post this almost like AI database of all these moments on the internet when they'd either said this or that or this or that, or if someone just like wanted to take someone out of context, they would be like, nope, this is because this, and I was like, oh, okay, this is really cool. But they also don't enjoy mild criticism. The 12 Times Texas police have changed their story about what happened during the school shooting that left 19 children dead. Texas officials on Friday again made crucial changes to their timeline of the shooting at the elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, adding to the lack of clarity around how the massacre took place and how the police responded to the attack. From the initial reports of the shooting on Tuesday to the most recent news briefing by the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Steve McGraw, police have changed the narrative of how law enforcement reacted to the gunman's rampage in which he killed 19 children and 2 teachers. Facing withering criticism from parents, McGraw said that the police commander in charge of the scene, Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo, refused to send police in to stop the shooting, calling the decision wrong. Here are the main changes. Uvalde police initially said the gunman was in custody. In one of the first statements about the shooting, the Uvalde Police Department said on Facebook that the gunman was in police custody. Update at 1:06, shooter is in police custody, the department said. The department later revealed that a U.S. Border Patrol tactical team fatally shot the gunman inside the elementary school. Nobody actually confronted the gunman before he went in. At a Wednesday press conference, the director of Texas Department of Public Safety, Steve McGraw, said that a brave resource officer engaged with the gunman. At the time, gunfire was not exchanged, but the subject was able to make it into the school. However, on Thursday, Escalon said this was incorrect. There was not an officer readily available and armed. And on Friday, McGraw added that the resource officer was not even on the school grounds at the time of the shooting. There was a discussion early on that the ISD had confronted the suspect. That did not happen. It was certainly stated in preliminary interviews, but often these preliminary interviews, witnesses get it wrong. The bottom line is that the officer was not on the scene, not on campus, but had heard the 911 call about a man with a gun, drove immediately to the area, sped to what he thought was the man with the gun, to the back of the school, to what turned out to be a teacher and not the suspect. McGraw added that the school police officer actually drove past the gunman who was hiding behind a car. How quickly the gunman entered the school. Police have been consistent in details of the gunman's attack on his grandmother before the shooting and his crash near a funeral home across the street of the school at 11:28 on Tuesday. But police initially said the gunman was confronted before going into the school. On Thursday, Escalon said that the gunman was firing outside of the school and entered the school at 11:40 a.m., leaving a 12-minute window that was unexplained. But on Friday, McGraw said the shooter actually entered the school at 11:33 a.m., 3 minutes after a teacher called 911 to report the crash and a gunman on school grounds. Police arrived on the scene quickly, but backed off for more than an hour. At Wednesday's press conference, McGraw said, bottom line, law enforcement was there. They did engage immediately. They did contain him in a classroom. They put a tactical stack together in a very orderly way and breached and assaulted the individual. Lieutenant Chris
donated on behalf of Political Papi just for a little break in the doom.
Thank you very much, the big room. But there's no breaks now. Lieutenant Chris Olivares on Wednesday said in an interview with the NBC's Today show, emphasized the speed of the police reaction. He said police responded within a moment's notice. He also said the officers, without hesitation, tried to make an entry into the school, but were stopped by the gunman firing at them. But on Thursday, police said the gunman had not been killed by the U.S. patrol agent until 12:40, raising questions of what happened in the roughly hour between the shooting beginning and the gunman being shot to death. According to the new information from McGraw Friday, 3 local police officers got to the school at 11:35, just 2 minutes after the gunman initially entered the building and opened fire. 2 of the cops were grazed by bullets as they entered the school, he added. In this latest description, McGraw said police exchanged gunfire with the suspect until 11:44 a.m. By 11:51, a police sergeant and federal agent arrived, and at 12:03, there were 19 police officers in the hallway outside of the classroom where the gunman was holed up. Why didn't the cops stop the Texas school shooter? On Wednesday, Olivares said the police began breaking windows and evacuating people as the gunman was barricaded in the school until more heavily armed officers arrived and killed the gunman. The first narrative did not make clear how long this took. The hour-long discrepancy was revealed on Thursday. When asked Thursday why police officers didn't take down the shooter as he left the classroom with children, asked the press conference why authorities didn't engage sooner, he said, "That's a tough question." He cited the need to evacuate people as a possible reason, and added in the officer's defense there was a lot going on, and it was a complex situation. But parents began sharing that cops outside the school had refused to go in to stop the shooter, and instead restrained parents who tried to go in themselves. "Nothing is adding up," Jay Martin, a local man, told the Wall Street Journal. "People are just really frustrated because no one is coming out and telling us the real truth of what went down." One video from outside the school shows police holding their desperate parents who want to go into the school and rescue their kids. One woman, Gladys Castillon, told the Journal that she had been begging police to be more proactive before the arrival of the tactical unit. Officers temporarily handcuffed a mom trying to get into the school. The mom ended up jumping a fence and running into the school, pulling her children to safety, according to the Journal. By Friday, the police had new details about the delay. McGraw pointed the blame at the school police chief, Arredondo, who said he ordered police not to engage the suspect because he thought the suspect was barricaded and there was no children at risk. McGraw, who wasn't at the scene at the time of the shooting and didn't command the officers at the time, added, "Obviously, based upon the information we have, there were children in that classroom, there were risk, and there was in fact still an active shooter situation." He noted, "Of course, it was not the right decision, it was the wrong decision. There is no excuse for that. When there's an active shooter, the rules change. You don't have time." The Uvalde School District did not respond to the insider's request for comment. In fact, McGraw revealed that students inside the classroom where the gunmen were firing called 911 nearly a dozen times over the course of the shooting. One girl begged 911 twice to send police now after the gunman killed her teacher and some of her classmates. According to the last timeline provided by McGraw on Friday, the gunman was shot and killed at 12:50, 10 minutes later than initially reported. Police have been conflicting reports of the timeline of the shooting, though law enforcement officials have noted that it is not unusual for a far more complex narrative or complete narrative to form as police investigate. Still, Texas authorities' news briefings have often left reporters and the public with more questions than answers. Even as of Friday, it was unclear if 911 dispatchers alerted police at the scene to the children still trapped inside with the shooter, and police did not say what ultimately convinced the tactical team to breach the classroom and shoot the gunman. Disgraceful is all that can really be said. Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form, available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we are prepared to embark on a mighty jihad in your name. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your humble jester, attempting in vain to get you to laugh. To our valiant knights of the Round Table, Benji Arnie, Tech Tink, Scary Earth Human, Tony, DM Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Mayred, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood. It doesn't matter what I believe, it only matters what I can prove. Egbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Coulter Smith, Jenna Tao, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevbot, EXE, Brian Ephraim, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojack, Saren 42, Catherine, Ramona Costa, Incosin, Agent NDN, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, La Media Panza, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our mugs and salute our brave heroes off to another glorious con.